So the gal at the front desk of my office tells me that next month in June they'll have a shredder coming to the office, and that if I need anything shredded, that I'm welcome to bring it. And I look her in the eye, and without the slightest sense of irony, I tell her, "Can I bring a handful of U.S. ambassadors?" And she looks at me quizzically. I evoke a very slight smile, and then we both crack up laughing.
Yeah, we got many of those.
Yeah, I know. So, well, I suppose we should do a podcast. Are you ready to record?
Yeah, it's that time of the week. Let me turn the thing on. Okay, we're
Okay,
done.
I'll count down in 3, 2, 1.
Hillary has been lengthening her excuses as to why she lost the election. She didn't really lose the election. It was stolen from her by, I think it's up to 24 different excuses she has now. Number 24 is content farms in Macedonia. And as I said, my grandfather was a Macedonian content farmer, and we often think about, gathering on the porch and recalling the old days on the Macedonian. He never thought that the old content farmers he left behind in Macedonia would one day steal the U.S. presidential election. They are gnarled, hard-working Macedonian peasants, and the way they were able to reach
The next president of the Republic of Macedonia has been chosen. The Pope has come and gone, and now the people must deal with the everyday drudgery of life under the increasing totalitarianism of Zoran Zaev and his sidekick Ali Ahmeti. But now they have to deal with Stevo Pendarovski, who will attempt to lord it over them as president, now that he's El Jefe. How will that work out? In the meantime, Zaev and his ministers are demanding a start date for EU accession talks. The EU is balking, and Nikola Dimitrov is rumored to be looking for a way out of Macedonia, seeing that he has absolutely nothing in common with the Macedonians. We'll discuss all of this and more on this episode of the Macedonian Content Farmers Podcast. I'm Jason Miko, coming to you from the foot of the Catalina Mountains in Oro Valley, Arizona.
And this is Cvetin and calling in from Skopje, Macedonia.
How you doing, Cvetin?
Fine, a bit tired after all the Pope and circumstances we had over the past week.
Pope and circumstances. Actually, graduation for a lot of high schoolers is coming up here later this month and next month. And the song they play at graduation is Pomp and Circumstances.
Oh, sure. Well, we had...
Anyway.
We had the real thing, actually. We had the pontiff
exactly.
for
Pomp and
half a
circumstances,
day.
not pomp and circumstances. Okay. Hey, we're recording this on Sunday, May 12, which is Mother's Day here in the United States and a lot of other countries around the world. I know this is going to drop tomorrow on Monday, May 13, so we hope that all of the mothers out there had a wonderful and happy Mother's Day. Without our mothers, we wouldn't be here, right?
Yep, wouldn't change them for the world.
Amen. Amen to that, brother. So today's a lovely day in Tucson, in Oro Valley. It rained all night last night. Normally it's supposed to be about 91 degrees Fahrenheit, about 33 Fahrenheit here. Today it's only going to be 72 or about 22 Celsius. So
we're buggered by the rain, but I guess you love it over there in the desert.
Man, you know what? Look, we live in the desert. We never complain about rain here in the desert because we need it. And so far this year we're doing real well. So, but we're not here to talk about the weather. We're here to talk about what's going on in Macedonia. And so...
It is raining, and it rained on Pendarovski's inauguration parade, which was today. Okay, actually, the rain started a bit later as he assumed office, so it was well-timed sign of disapproval from the one above.
Yes, well, as we know, though, the one above didn't put him in that place, but he allowed him to take that place for whatever reason. So. And now we have to deal, as I said in the opening monologue there, that Stevo's in charge of the presidency at least, and he's going to try and lord it over Zoran Zaev. And as you and others have been pointing out, he owes an awful lot of debts to an awful lot of people from a certain ethnic group. And so tell us, why don't you bring us up to date on the inauguration today of Stevo Pendarovski.
Yeah, stuff happens when you do not win your elections on your own propulsion, but have to rely on the kindness of strangers, or in this case, all well-to-known political opportunists and nationalists. But it's an interesting coalition they have there. The urban Macedonian post-national elites who do not care whether they are Macedonian or European or Yugoslav, as they used to say in Pendarovski's family, at least, until very recently. He comes from a family of police people. He started in the police, whose task was to protect Yugoslavia, the old state, and this is they did that so well. We are now in our third country since I was born. Anyway, he had the inauguration today. These signs of the debt he owes were prominently displayed because Talat Jaferi, who was leading the event in the parliament, he chose to speak only in Albanian, which is his interpretation of this Albanian language law, which Pendarovski promised he will sign first thing in the morning, or maybe even this evening, as he is now in the office. Mm-hmm. So it was, notable for many Macedonians to see the president inaugurated in Albanian. Pendarovski did speak in Macedonian. He was waving his certificate from the State Electoral Commission, with again largely prominently displayed in Macedonian and Albanian. Mm-hmm. Never happened before. His main visitors here were from the future Greater Albania, I suppose, country, which is brewing in the Balkans. It was the presidents of Kosovo and Albania, as well as Serbia and Bulgaria. Everybody looking into what's happening in the country and how they can put this to their advantage.
So Edi Rama wasn't there, the Prime Minister of Albania, but Ilir Meta was?
Yeah, Edi Rama had his government building burned down yesterday, or at least the entrance to it anyway. Wow. So he was indisposed.
Yeah. Well,
I think he's afraid to leave the country.
Yeah, Edi Rama's the one who's been raising the specter of Greater Albania more and more because he's got major protests going on. So whenever he raises the specter of Greater Albania, it's to detract from his own problems back home and to try and create, quote unquote, a patriotic message to unify the very disparate groups within Albania itself. So, I kind of wish, Cvetin, that at least they would all just come out and put their cards on the table and say it, at least in the ethnic minority Albanians in Macedonia. If they wanted a binational state, just say it. At least then we know what we're dealing with. But they're hinting around it, they're dancing around it, and they're incrementally moving towards it, etc.
It's very annoying, very exhausting on their part. But we all know what the game is, where we are heading.
Yeah. So, but again, and I've said this before, you've said it, and I know, and I've written it before, and we'll continue to write it. The Macedonians have it within themselves to control the narrative and all the issues in Macedonia if they were to at least put aside some of their differences and unite on the essential issues. I've written about the cult of unity in the past, and how you don't necessarily need a unified country on everything, because that requires force to make everybody unified. But on the essential issues, you need to be unified, and the existence of the state, the existence of the Republic of Macedonia as a unified state of the Macedonian people and the various minorities that live within it, that is an essential issue that Macedonians should be unified on, and they're not right now, and I don't know who's going to bring them together.
Yeah, it was Gruevski's whole thing that he was doing, and since he was attacked the way he was by both neighboring countries and the international community, the American diplomats, the EU, with his demise, we lost the idea of Macedonia as a primarily Macedonian nation state, and now it's up for grabs, as all the visitors in Pendarovski's inauguration today were certainly taking notes.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting. Actually, last night, since we like to have references to pop culture in this podcast, last night I went to see Avengers Endgame with my nephew, and I think we're going to need to, in the post-production of this podcast, Cvetin, you're going to have to put in a spoiler alert here.
If you haven't seen Avengers Endgame yet, stop watching, because there's some serious spoilers about to come up.
So something that Thanos, who is the villain of Avengers Endgame, said, and he was in the previous Avengers film, I think Infinity Wars, which I actually didn't see, but on the drive to the movie theater, my nephew caught me up on all that so that I could, so I knew what was going on.
All the 50 superheroes who were involved, right?
Exactly. So anyway, so Thanos has a quote in Avengers Endgame, and again, Thanos is the villain. We've already given the spoiler alert. And Thanos says, quote, "I thought by eliminating half of life, the other half would thrive, but you have shown me that's impossible." And then he says, as long as there are those that remember what was, there will always be those that are unable to accept what can be. They will resist. And, that goes to this whole issue that we enjoy talking about and writing about. You brought it up in episode 23, your farmer's pick, the Game of Thrones, which I still haven't seen, but the whole issue of memory and the past and remembering, the Chestertonian principle of the democracy of the dead, which speaks to the one who came before him, Edmund Burke, who talked about the issue of the past. I forgot what his actual quote was, but what we owe to those who came before us, and again, just the whole idea of memory. And so Thanos is trying to wipe out the memory of the past because they are an obstacle to him to the future, and we see that going on here in Macedonia with the current government and the urban leftist elitists and others that are trying to wipe out Macedonia's past, change it, make it Bulgarian, whatever. So that they can have their, because that's an obstacle to their quote-unquote glorious future.
Yeah, there was a tweet briefly doing rounds a few weeks ago, and what is tradition? And it says it's peer pressure from dead people. They are annoying you into doing stuff you don't want to do because they did it, and you have to do it the same way. But and I responded to one of those who was pushing this, that it's not peer pressure from dead people, it's actually a survival guide, and you can discard it at your own peril, because if you don't follow the advice which is contained in tradition, whether it's the Bible, the books, and oral tradition, or just sometimes stupidly looking customs and superstitions which actually have some merit, we'll find out, you will get run over. And this is literally what we're doing now. We are, we're not too stuffy guys. Okay, we are a bit stuffy, but this is not why we insist on this. In the case of Macedonia, we're specifically coming down to playing with fundamental principles of proper forming of a country. And we do not have a lot of real estate so that we could just ignore a flare-up in a distant part of the country, like in Ukraine, where, I don't know, I suppose people in Kiev or Lvov can say, well, okay, it's 1,000 kilometers to the east, the fighting, I can get on with my life.
Right.
Here, everything is within your mortar range in Macedonia. And we are joking around with fundamental principles of sovereignty and nationality, and uniting around kinship, and many of my fellow Macedonians want to be so carefree and caution to the wind with these principles. So it's 2019, we are, it's the 21st century, we are in Europe, what's all this with the stupid, antiquated nationalism and your, but then again, Sarajevo was, 20 years ago?
25, yeah.
No, not even...
Not even 25, yeah. So...
Yeah. It's not... And we're playing with... we're doing the same... we're making the same mistakes. We're pushing, like Yugoslavia was a country of everybody and nobody, playing one ethnic tribe against the other. And this is obviously... our neighbors have taken note. Now, as the internationals were absent from Pendarovsky's inauguration, that was noticeable. No serious American representative.
Good point.
Some minor EU and NATO people. Nothing above, senior paper shuffler. But the neighbors are taking notice of what's happening here, and all of them have their very interesting theories on what should happen in the future, and we have preemptively given up on our right of sovereignty. We no longer have a national politician elected by the majority of ethnic Macedonians in this country.
Right. Yeah, you bring up some very good points. But actually, I want to just kind of continue on that, on this rift. 3 points on that. You said, starting with your last point, you said we don't have, but we, Macedonia, must have, and that person or those people have to rise up, because otherwise bad things are going to happen. And I do believe, honestly, Cvetin, that there are people within Macedonia who can rise up, who are there, who are willing to come forward to unite Macedonians to take back sovereignty, take back the nation state. That's number one. Number two, I found the Edmund Burke quote that I wanted to give from 1790. Society becomes a partnership not only between those who are living, but between those who are living, those who are dead, and those who are yet to be born, meaning the unborn, future generations of Macedonians who have not been born, assuming that the government allows them to be born and doesn't abort them. But that is the thread that Burke has, that Chesterton continues. I think Tocqueville touches on it as well, and others. And that the essence of conservatism is that there's this long link between those of us here in the present, those in the past, and those in the future. And we owe a debt to those who have come before us. And then you mentioned, I think you said something about everything's within mortar range, which speaks to, I think it was the Ali Ahmeti and his terrorists I think it was, they were in Orachinovo when they threatened in 2001 to bomb the refinery, the airport, and the parliament. And this speaks to a column I'm currently working on about, quote unquote, the approved narrative amongst the Western elites, the media, academics, the NGOs, etc. Always talking about the events of 2017 and the quote unquote storming of Parliament, but they all avoid things like what happened in 2001 with Ali Ahmeti, and that was a deliberate attempt to split the country in two. And I can prove it because I have the quotes from Ali Ahmeti himself. But they're always avoiding that, and that was a flare-up. I want to flare up. It was a war that was avoided due to a number of issues, but because they couldn't win on the battlefield, Ali Ahmeti and his people are trying to win through, literally through the quote-unquote democratic process. And again, it's up to the Macedonians to put an end to that.
Well, there's still significant pressure on what remains of Macedonian leaders in the country, even after they left office, without giving pardons to all of the hundreds of VMRO officials and activists who are charged by Zaev, who are put in prison, the 16 from the parliament incident who are sentenced to lengthy prison sentences, Spiro Ristovski, Miljana Kievski, who are arrested again for the same case and for a dozen other politically driven charges, who were sent to prison specifically to have them beaten up by the Albanian terrorist group from Kumanovo, which was the last time essentially VMRO and the Gruevski fought against the scenario which was happening, which was prepared against Macedonia, the attack on Kumanovo in 2015. This group now practically runs the prison and keeps issuing threats against VMRO, they endorsed Pendarovski as president. I mean, we have terrorist commanders who run a prison in which people are sent to be beaten up by the government, political opponents of the government, and the terrorists are endorsing political candidates in the elections. So this is where we are at right now. We had, today I was just reading Jezir Shakiri. He was one of the commanders from one of the smaller depopulated villages on the border above Skopje, but he is very, TV present and savvy, etc. And at one point, Zaev appointed him his advisor on anti-radicalization, you can imagine.
Wow. And
then he had to remove him under pressure, so this guy was crying that he has not enough money to sustain him. I mean, it's really pathetic. I mean, these guys, as thugs and bullies, they're cowards and pathetic in essence. So he was giving a statement how highly he praises the commanders of the Kumanovo attack. He was Zaev's advisor until months ago, and he's now singing praises to the latest group of Albanian terrorists who attacked Macedonia. And again, they are cowards. They're counting on American support to carry on with their plan, with their strategy against Macedonia. This is another huge obstacle we face here in normalizing the situation in the country. Zaev's people continue to lick spittle on the Albanians. I mean, we had he has like this four nationalist, four patriotic Macedonian people around him, like Stoyancho Angelov, who calls himself a general of the police from 2001, etc. And a few days ago in an interview, he was justifying the ambush attack in 2001, which killed 10 Macedonian soldiers on the Skopje-Tetovo highway, one of the worst Uchoka attacks, as a legitimate attack on a legitimate target. I mean, in short, what I'm saying, we have not reached the bottom in these caving and concessions toward the Albanians. I fear we're just beginning now with Pendarovski's win and SDSM's rapid decline of the ruling Zaev's party in the polls, especially among ethnic Macedonians. So the more in depth they are to the Albanians, we'll have more of these concessions, like symbolic statements on national divisive issues. There was a protest in support of these Kumanovo commanders, these terrorists. It's not. I wouldn't be surprised if they're eventually released from prison. But then there will be financial things as well. We stopped building the new addition to the large Mother Teresa clinic in Skopje, and we're moving construction right on the outskirts of the ring road around Skopje, which is putting it essentially in Kosovo's backyard. So Macedonia already serves as the de facto hospital of Kosovo, which hasn't been able to build up a healthcare system. So now we're investing in a huge public clinic, but we're moving it outside of Skopje toward Kosovo.
Wow.
Pendarovski promised to build, they've stopped construction on the two highways which would be more important to Macedonians, the one to Štip, which I'm eagerly awaiting, and the one to Ohrid.
Right.
And we're building, Pendarovski promised we'll build a priority highway to Kosovo. So, these are going to be the specifics. We'll be paying for Kosovo's healthcare, for infrastructure as well. I mean, this is what it means to give up on your sovereignty in the Balkans.
Well,
22 minutes.
Yeah, no, and just kind of continuing on, you mentioned several references to Kumanovo, and I know that we just had the anniversary a few days ago of that, and everybody's favorite foreign-funded quote-unquote news publication, Balkan Insight, ran a lengthy piece on that, which was full of innuendo and rumors and things like that. Didn't prove a bloody thing, but I always find it interesting when the authors of such publications talk about how the Albanians felt that they weren't getting proper representation. And the thing is, Macedonia's minority Albanians have always been in parliament. They've always been represented in government, and that's no reason to pick up a gun. And I have to mention, since I just mentioned Balkan Insight, which is funded to a large degree by the Open Society Institute, George Soros, today is Mother's Day, and I always like to remind folks that George Soros offered to help his own mother commit suicide.
Yep. Son of the year there.
Yeah.
And Balkan Insight is also funded by USAID. So this is essentially a situation where the US government is directly funding an organization, which was, they were faced with this horrible situation in 2015 when they started the protests. They exposed that they have moles in the intelligence services in Macedonia, and that they want to bring down the Gruevski government. So shortly after, we have this group of commanders who fought in 2001, in 99 in Kosovo, so and basically apparently have not been reimbursed enough for their sacrifice in Kosovo. They were not appointed ministers of the Kosovo government or whatever, so they figured they can, since Macedonia's government is collapsing anyway, they could do what Ali Ahmeti did in 2001, and they could repeat the same scenario in 2015.
Exactly.
Take over a city in Macedonia, establish themselves as de facto power in the country, and then wait to be appointed, to be negotiated with and appointed in the government. And so this was clearly a consequence of the political crisis started by Zaev and supported by the EU and the US. So what do they do to obscure the fact that they've they have essentially pushed Macedonia into an abyss again after 2001 for the second time? So they come up with this conspiracy theory that, like, Macedonians staged an attack on themselves, like Gruevski was so tired of being in office, he wanted to bring down his own government, attack himself, to what? Cover up from minor protests of several hundreds protesters, easily ignorable before the attack, very much more difficult to ignore after the attack. So they came up with this conspiracy theory, and it's being promoted by a news site funded by the U.S. government.
Right.
And this is, we often joke that when Russia Today does these kinds of things, they would come up with conspiracy theories, and they're gleefully doing them. But what's the difference now between Russian state propaganda and American propaganda?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And this is something, you're in media. I've been involved in media and public relations most of my professional life. This is to the column I'm writing, the next column, I think next week or the week after, about the approved narrative and how, and this just speaks to the larger picture, I think, of how nobody really believes, quote unquote, the mainstream press. I don't know if I'd put Balkan, I don't know if I'd put Balkan Insight in there as the mainstream press, but they're certainly, they have that far left worldview. I mean, I have to, going slightly afield, CNN had a guest on the other week who said that, Catherine Quinn, I think was her name, talking about the whole abortion issue, saying that when a woman when a woman gets pregnant, that thing inside her is not a human being. And so when you've got the mainstream media saying that, nobody can listen or believe them anymore. And so they've just gone so far afield. So anyway, let's move on to a couple of other things. I want to talk about timeline, because we kind of talk about that each time we have this podcast, and then talk about the corruption that is going on in Macedonia. So again, this is May. In 2 weeks, we've got European Union elections for members of parliament throughout the EU. It's suspected that the left and even the mainstream right are not going to do very well. And that I'm going to call them the sovereigntists, those who are in favor of the nation state, are going to do much better. At the same time, you've got Greek local elections. During those elections, I saw that New Democracy leader Mitsotakis today was calling for early parliamentary elections in Greece if Syriza, Alexis Tsipras' party, loses those local elections. And then after that, you've got the EU has got to decide whether or not it's got to open up accession talks for Macedonia and Albania, and I think that'll happen in June. And then after that, Macedonia the news about Macedonia falls off a cliff, even though the think tanks and the media and the academics and others are trying to keep the whole thing alive. But everybody's just absolutely exhausted by all this. But going back to the accession talks, so now, as I think we talked about, Zaev is actually demanding or begging, alternately demanding and begging that the EU open accession talks with Macedonia. But they can't because of the corruption.
Yeah, we are now threatening them that we'll collapse in a bloody conflict unless they give us the accession talks, which is, great for the future member of your club. Yeah, well, I mean, if you don't let me join your country club, I may start taking heroin again,
A nice little country club you got, Governor. It'd be a shame that something happened to it.
It's horrible.
It's a classic Monty Python skit. So the Anti-Corruption Commission has opened up a number of investigations against Zoran Zaev and a number of his ministers. How did that come about? Why is that going on now?
Well, I mean, this is on proposal of Vemera,
Okay.
So essentially they had to pick it up. They could not ignore it. We'll see what. But then they look into it, and there is no way. I mean, what are they going to say? One of them is about Zaev's video recording in which he's literally asking for a businessman for a bribe.
That was when he was
instructing him to. Right? Yeah, he was. His excuse was that he speaks this notoriously difficult Strumica dialect, so he did not mean bring the money to my brother. He meant something else. But I mean, it's even more laughable when he tries to excuse it. So I mean, this should have been the end of it. I was stupefied when the internationals who were looking into this and insisting on accountability for the Vemera people, that they did not similarly, when in 2015 this tape was first revealed, did not respond to this obvious case of Zaev's corruption. But then after a short while we realized, this is all a joke. This is Nobody cares about actual corruption or anything. They're just using it as an excuse to get their own people in the government and have the country renamed and redefined and partitioned and whatever.
Right. And so you got that, and then I just can't help but notice. And look, I follow Macedonian news daily, throughout the day. At night, I'm looking for whatever's going on, and I've just noticed over the past couple of years the level of just general lawlessness, crime. I'm not talking about the corruption in the government, but general lawlessness, crime, murders, robberies, people literally disappearing. Seems to be on an unfortunate increase. And I saw a Dutch businessman in Tetovo the other week was killed.
Oh yeah! Oh God! Yeah.
By his employee. Now maybe that's just a employer-employee dispute, and the guy that murdered him was just mentally unbalanced or whatever.
Yeah, but it happens more often if people feel there will be impunity, and this is what's happening. I mean, we have the prime minister. It's a joke here. We mentioned this before. Whenever a murder, shooting, something happens, you just go to the person's Facebook page, and sure enough, he has pictures with Zaev. And this is not just idle talk. This is just not by accident. Mobsters here are now using a picture with Zoran Zaev as a calling card. They go racketeer somebody, as you said before. Nice place you get there, and they come with a picture with the prime minister because they're saying, I can kill you, nobody can touch me.
Yeah, in the during the aughts, 2000 to 2009, and even during the past, 6, 7, 8 years over in Bulgaria, a lot of their oligarchs were murdered, and then it was never solved, and so. I always thought that Macedonia could have a tagline, come to Macedonia, at least we don't kill our oligarchs. But now it seems the oligarchs aren't being killed, but the rise, the increase of general lawlessness and crime is something I have not witnessed, especially during the time that I lived there, and then the years after that when I was going back and forth on a much more regular basis. But it's increasing, and that's not good. That's not good for the government. That's not good for the citizens. And there's a correlation between why has general lawlessness and crime really increased in Macedonia over the past 2 years, and then you look at who's in charge.
Yeah, we used to have an impression that if you go to an Albanian neighborhood and you see it's the parts of it which should function publicly are completely unregulated, and not in a good way, but in a chaotic way. So like. Nobody's crossing the street where there is the pedestrian crossing, things like this. And, we would say like, okay, maybe, oftentimes Albanians would say we do not consider this country our own country because we are discriminated, and they would point something like, recently somebody told me, grasping at anything to say, he said, well, we never had a speaker of parliament before, like, okay, so you have to have a speaker in order to cross the street where you're supposed to, like a normal person, right. Fine. Yep. But now you have a situation where Macedonians don't feel this either, and why should I throw the trash where I'm supposed to when my money is going elsewhere? I'm ignored at the central level by the government. My vote doesn't count in the referendum. The prime minister is a criminal. Yeah, well, why should I care?
Yeah. Yeah, well, that speaks to the whole issue that we've been talking about during these podcasts and writing about, etc. The general, as a result of the referendum and some other issues, the whole concept of democracy and the institutions of democracy are being trampled upon, and people are seeing that. And so they think that, well, if the institutions of democracy don't work, if the concept of democracy doesn't work, then why should I be a responsible citizen? Why should I bother to obey the law, whether it's where you dump your trash or the issue of the bigger issues of crime, of robberies and murder and things like that. And that's where you get that breakdown. And I know our friends in the civil society movement there talk a lot about how they're the vanguards of keeping people
falling off the cliff. They'll be the vanguard of falling off
Well,
the cliff.
yeah, I know. Yes, when their colorful revolution comes, they'll be the first ones to be lined up against the wall, because the revolution always devours its own. Hey, let's talk about. I see that Zaev wants to do what is it, Operation Broom, where he's going to clean up and remove some ministers or shuffle some people around and whatnot. There's been rumors that Dimitrov is going to leave, and look, we've always known that Nikola Dimitrov can't stay as foreign minister forever. He doesn't want to be there. Because he has more in common with his friends in Berlin than with sheep farmers in Berovo. And so he doesn't want to be there. And what's the rumor? The rumor is he's going to leave. Is he going to leave?
Yeah, the report was that he plans to go to the Brookings Institution, where he was invited by Victoria Nuland, allegedly, and also allegedly, and our friend Sasha Uzunov was actually trying to have this question answered by the Brookings, whether they also had a hand in writing the Prespa Treaty. A scholar there, a former U.S. diplomat who worked there, was allegedly involved, and then they ignored his request, but ultimately denied the request once it was published in Macedonia that this is going to happen. So Zaev made this promise after this horrific drop in support they had in the first round, where they lost. They fell from over 500,000 votes together with Dewey in 2017 to 320,000 votes in the first round of the presidential elections. He was panicking. He didn't know what to do. He promised that he will start dismissing people from the government who have been corrupt. So basically everybody started pointing fingers, mostly these guys who are who have an endless supply of relatives who apparently all need to be hired in the public sector. So this was the easy target. Zaev stopped short of saying that they will be dismissed, the officials, but asked them to ask their relatives to resign, and a few of them did. But, every day we have, for the very few who resigned, Vimera every day are having a press conference, just saying this guy hired 4 people, this member of parliament hired 3 people, etc. These are their relatives. We're learning some new words. We have complicated words for your wife's brother's wife. So, it's...
Wife's brother's wife. Okay, yeah.
Yeah. So we're learning there are terms like shurnaika and baldaska and swastika and whatever. I don't know them. I get lost. So this is one group. Then there is obviously the hugely corrupt people, starting with Zaev himself, Kocha and Jushov, his deputy, and we could easily lump Shakirinsky in there as well. But then they would probably be untouchable. But Nikola Dimitrov is touchable because he's not SDSM. Right. And Zaev could easily dismiss him and say, there, I fired somebody. He cannot dismiss the Dewey people. They started saying, well, Ali Ahmeti will decide on this. It's not up to you to decide. We run this place, not you. So, poor old Nikola Dimitrov is the obvious choice to having himself kicked out of the government. And then Zaev very quickly changed tack after a while, and he started saying, well, but I will be firing Vimera people as well, as if,
Don't feel too sorry for Slick Nick, as our friend Sasha Uzunov calls him. He will, again, the Western elites like him because he's one of them, and he'll land on his feet. The others, not so much. Who knows what's going to happen to them. Well, we'll see. Yeah. Operation Broom is in effect. Stand by for news.
But it's interesting to note how, he would have, I presume, his entire experience shows us what's happening with the State Department, how deeply corrupt this institution is. And I recently mentioned we had, he would have support in DC from the incoming new deputy, or is it Assistant Secretary of State, Phil Ricker. Yeah. I assume he's going to be appointed. And he's now being portrayed as the Republican choice. And recently I was trolling Twitter and I noticed he's essentially the person who made him, Ambassador Chris Hill.
Yes.
Both previous ambassadors to Macedonia, who went on then to completely mishandled the Iraq transition, and then in withdrawal, and before that the North Korean nuclear.
North Korea, right?
He's a uniquely failed American diplomat, honestly. So I go to his Twitter account and I see every second of his retweets. Chris Hill. Every second retweet of his is for Adam Schiff, the guy who wants to put Trump in prison.
Oh,
yeah. I know, but...
No. I was just going to say, so yeah, you look at people like Chris Hill. You look at people like Dan Serwer. You look at Florian Bieber and James Kerr Lindsay. You look at Dimitar Belchev, or Bechev, sorry, Dimitar. All of these think tanks, these academics, these former U.S. officials and whatnot, that claim to be writing and speaking, etc., in the best interests of Macedonia, which is why they support Zoran Zaev and Nikola Dimitrov and Prespa and whatnot. You go and all you have to do is look at their Twitter feed and you find out these people are far, far left in terms of their worldview and what they want. And, Phil Rieker, Republican appointee, maybe he's appointed, sure, by a Republican administration, but Phil Rieker isn't a Republican. Look, most people in the U.S. State Department are either Democrats or independents. I would bet most of them are frankly independents, to be honest with you. They don't want to, but it doesn't matter because their worldview is far left. Most of them are atheists or militant atheists, or at least secularists or humanists or non-believers of one type or another, according to Os Guinness, and I believe that to be the case. And so their whole worldview is based on creating utopia in the here and the now, the perfectibility of mankind, because there is no hereafter. They don't believe in God. They don't believe in a hereafter. They don't believe in the past. They only believe in what is going on now and trying to make it into utopia, which is a word that literally means no place. And they all want to do it through social engineering with taxpayer money, and with them as the social engineers, with them as the high priests and the high priestesses of this new cult of the perfectibility of mankind. Those are the people that we're dealing with.
Yeah, but Dick Cheney sent Chris Hill to be the ambassador to Iraq after the war.
Yeah.
So at some point they're going to have to start learning their lessons. Now his understudy is going to be appointed to this position in the State Department, and Viktor Orban is in D.C. now.
He's
right. Meeting Trump tomorrow, and this is if we want to be friendly, we want to be close to the U.S. It should go without saying that for 8 years you have the other guys in charge, the Obamas, and you will get some flack from them. Although, organizing a full-colored revolution to overturn the Macedonian government is far above and beyond anything that should be considered legitimate approach by the U.S. government toward Macedonia. But then, then you say, well, at some point Americans are not 100% behind this. There are good people among them. Half of the country is still normal, and they're going to elect somebody else. Maybe not somebody like Trump, right. But so you have Donald Trump now, and he should begin appointing different types of people, but then he would go for Chris Hill's understudy. And all of the potential goodwill which should be engineered tomorrow will be lost in the back channels once Phil is operating.
Well, that's true, yeah. But look, let's be honest. Donald Trump has no idea who Phil Rieker is. He doesn't know that he's being appointed. He's never heard of the man. He never will hear of the man. It's not Donald Trump. It's not even Mike Pompeo, the Secretary of State. It's the other people. Of course, Mike Pompeo and Don Trump. Trump doesn't have to sign anything, I don't think, for Phil Rieker's appointment, but Mike Pompeo does, the Secretary of State. So it's not those guys. It's the apparatus. It's some people call it the deep state. I call it the permanent state. Some people call it the managerial state. Whatever you want to call it, it's this thing, this blob, this beast that I don't think can be reformed. Actually, to quote our friend Grover Norquist, on the size of the U.S. government, he doesn't want to kill the U.S. government. He wants to make it small enough so he can take it into the bathtub and then drown it. Same thing with the State Department.
Go
ahead.
But the thing is, we have the other guy who was involved. Now Phil is good friends with Ambassador Bailey. He told me so. So basically, we could say this is a free a transition line of three ambassadors in Macedonia who screwed us over royally. But the other guy who was involved in the name change in this process of arresting Vimera, bribing Greek members of parliament, getting us there, is Geoffrey Piat, who was U.S. ambassador to Ukraine before being appointed to Greece. And he was in the Ukraine. He's the guy who's actually talking with Victoria Nuland on the phone when she makes her famous statement, the EU. And but the more interesting thing, while he was ambassador, there was the presidential elections in the U.S. and Manafort was appointed campaign manager after the previous manager hit a girl or whatever happened for Trump. So, but by now we have the experience from Macedonia. We can assume that the U.S. embassy was running the Ukrainian prosecutors as well as the special prosecutorial unit in the Ukraine, similar to Kati Tsayanova's team of geniuses here in Macedonia. So during the campaign, the New York Times receives a ledger from the Ukrainian prosecutors, which has, conveniently enough, Manafort's name in it. So, not to go into the weeds, it's very clear that the U.S. Embassy coordinated with the Ukrainian prosecutors to provide ammunition for a lefty press in the U.S. to attack Trump during the elections. This is not something that an ambassador should be doing. He should not be interfering in his own country's elections, helping his former chief state secretary Hillary Clinton, and especially he should not be using the prosecutorial service of the country where he is an ambassador, and apparently viceroy and governor and chief prosecutor, etc., and an inquisitor. And now he's in Athens, and he's still in Athens.
And his term's been extended.
Nobody has
extended.
I suppose so. Bailey's was extended every 6 months.
So.
I don't want Trump to remove him because he's upsetting me, although he should. But he literally went after him. He put his campaign manager in prison. He's in solitary confinement. He wants to put him in prison. We have a long experience in Yugoslavia, communist times. It's the president, the leader is good, the marshal is good. It's the people around him, and he doesn't even know what he's doing or what they're doing in his name, as you mentioned before. But if they don't wise up fast, they will have even more Trump's people in prison, his sons, himself eventually, and the country's lost.
The country's lost in more ways than one.
They're not coming back from this.
But anyway, so just to close this rant, and then let's move on to our farmers' picks. But just to close this rant, I think we can all agree that the majority of U.S. ambassadors are jackasses.
Yep.
And I think we've got to do something to make it stick together, because you can be pretty sure that if it does start to gain altitude, the Russians will be working behind the scenes to try to torpedo it.
Fuck the EU.
No, exactly.
And welcome back to the Macedonian Content Farmers Podcast. Cvetin and Jason here, and it's time for our farmers picks. Jason, what have you got?
Well, again, I was ending on a light note. It's something positive. And this is a blog I've been following for quite some time now. It's a family on the road, and they're a Macedonian family, and they write some wonderful stuff about Macedonia. They had a post out actually in April, but I just saw it last week. Top 10 Macedonian movies you shouldn't miss. And it's got some of the classics in there, Before the Rain, Dust, some of the newer ones like Honeyland, Secret Ingredient. I noticed that he didn't have our film in there, the film that I did with the talented group of Macedonians 10 years ago called A Name is a Name, but that's okay. Maybe it's not the top 10, and it's a different one. These are all mostly fiction films, but they're all very good. We'll put it in the show notes. That's the top 10 Macedonian movies you shouldn't miss. That's my farmer's pick for the week. Cvetin, what's your farmer's pick?
Oh, well, we have the Barnum's Circus of Freaks starting again. It's the Eurovision Song Contest, everybody. And it starts tomorrow, I think. And we sent as our candidate Tamara Todevska, who sings a song in English, all English, called Proud. And I'll post the video at the end of this podcast because it's notable. Tamara, the last or the one before, the Eurovision before, we had the daughter of the U.S. ambassador's chief political advisor sent there. And this year we're not doing much better. Tamara was, for a while, considered more on the right. She would sing at Vimera rallies and events. stuff like that. But she's an early adoptee of the new name. She started saying that she will present herself gladly as the Republic of North Macedonia. Even she did this old stupid canard about, well, we were Fyrom before, now we are North Macedonia, it's better, this horrible thing. And the song itself, a girl power song. She has a video with all women participants, and the obligatory hijab wearing, migrant promoting woman is in one frame. The body positive woman is in the other. And translation, it means she's fat. The whale. But the song is proud.
We say
and
she's
okay,
big
fine,
bone,
girls.
so.
Yeah, it's the genetics. And it's the thing is, everybody wants to feel good and proud of herself, etc. Fine. But then she will be singing about North Macedonia. And where is the pride in your country and your nation? This goes out the window. We are proud in everything else except the nationality, which is being... and, on top of this comes the cultural, the heritage, the tradition, layered one on top of the other. And we're throwing this out the window. But sure, let's be proud because some girl likes to eat at 3 a.m. And the funniest thing we have here is that the sponsor of the song, I suppose of the song or of the contest, I wasn't sure. I couldn't really. It's some website which looks like it's been made yesterday, and the website is myheritage.com. Seems like it's promoting something like going into your lineage and genetical background, and send us a blood sample and we'll tell you who you are. So they're the sponsors, I suppose, of the song, as I could make up. And it's even more hilarious because we are, gleefully throwing out the window our heritage, but then we are sponsored by MyHeritage.
Funny. Okay, now I'm
.com.
gonna have to dig into that, look into that. Maybe we'll have something on that in next week's podcast. Maybe I'll write about it. Who knows? Wow.
Yeah, and God forbid she wins. I mean, you know what happens when you win.
Good heavens, that would be horrible.
Yeah, like Yugoslavia won and Serbia won, and that's the worst. That means you're finished.
Oh, all right. Well, never a dull moment. Always good talking to you, Cvetin. All right,
take care, buddy. Take care.
Indeed.
Till next week.
Try to tell you what to do, how to look, smile, act, and move. All the rules are made for you to lose. But baby, let me tell you something, girl. For every tear the world makes you cry, hold on to me, I am always on your side. Don't be afraid to spread your wings and fly. Tell them, raise your voice and say it loudly. Show them what it means to stand up proudly. Tell them, this is me and thanks to you I'm proud. Go on now, your voice and say it loudly. Show them what it means to stand up proudly. Tell them this is me and